Welcome back to the Badass Literature Society, where badasses come together to rate and review novels recommended by you. Hi, I'm Michael.
This is Barbara.
Lauren is on vacation this month, and while we're on that topic, Badass Literature Society will be taking a month off, so there will be no review episodes released in August, but we do have a special bonus episode coming out mid-August, and then we'll be back for our full reviews and back to our normal schedule in September.
This month, we read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab.
Like always, we'll split the podcast into two sections, a spoiler-free discussion and our overall score, and then a more in-depth discussion of the plot and the ending, which will obviously be spoiler-heavy, as well as our individual scores for the book. Before we dive in, though, let's talk about the author. Victoria, or V.E. Schwab, is the #1 New York Times, USA Today, and indie best-selling author of more than a dozen books, including Vicious, the Shades of Magic series, of which longtime listeners will remember we read the first one of, and This Savage Song. Her work has received critical acclaim, been featured by EW and the New York Times, been translated into more than a dozen languages, and has also been optioned for TV and film by Gerard Butler's production company. The Independent calls her the natural successor to Diana Wynne Jones and touts her enviable, almost Gaiman-esque ability to switch between styles, genres, and tones. Barbie, you want to tell us some of the background on the book?
The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue was originally published on October 6th of 2020. It is categorized as a fantasy fiction, historical fiction, and romance. It is 442 pages and currently has a 4.3 out of 5 on Goodreads, 4.5 out of 5 on Amazon, a 4.6 out of 5 on Barnes & Nobles, and a 4.6 out of 5 on Audible. So kind of close to each other score-wise. It was nominated for the Locus Award for Best Fantasy Novel in 2021 and Goodreads Choice Award for Fantasy in 2020, and it has not won any awards as of this podcast recording.
The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Addie LaRue is a young woman who trades her soul for immortality and a life of freedom. She could live forever, but no one will remember her. It's a bargain she strikes with the devil or the darkness, or to be determined later in the podcast as we discuss, out of desperation and a desire for more than the life that small town France, Villon, France, is offering her at the time. Fast forward 300 years later, Addie has learned to survive, but is still living a mostly invisible existence in New York City. Then she walks into a small New York City bookstore and meets a man who, for the first time in over 300 years, can remember her name and her face. So, what did you think about The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, Barbara? And remember, no spoilers.
I really enjoyed it. It's so beautifully written. It's hard not to fall in love with the words that Victoria writes. It's a unique twist on the Faustian tale. I really enjoy the cast of characters for the most part. There's not as much history as I thought there would be, though, and it is a sadder book as well, so keep that in mind.
So I also really liked this book. Like Barbara said, it's beautifully written, and because of that, it's very easy to just get sucked into the words and lost of a story, which is something that doesn't happen in every book, but I really like it when it does. I also enjoyed the characters throughout the book and time. We'll get to that later, though. While I agree with Barbara that more history would have been really cool, the scenes we do get are really well done, and it's really neat to see the main character, Addie, weaved through these real life moments throughout history, from 1600 small town France to, 2014 New York City, right? But yeah, like she said, not a happy book. There are some happy moments for sure, but I would say that there's an overall darker tone, like a cloudy day where the sun breaks through rarely.
Are you trying to be poetic like she was, Michael?
I was, yeah. Mm-hmm. Did it work? You could say no, because I know it didn't. But
so I fell in love with her words. She was meh. So
yeah,
I'm just kidding.
So like always, we're not going to go into our individual ratings right now. You'll have to wait for that. But our group score for this one was an 8.75 out of 10. Pretty darn high group score. I think, well, we'll talk about the individuals later, so never mind. I'm not going to go into that right now. But so next question, would you recommend this book? So for me, I would recommend it. It's definitely, though, like a love or hate book. It's not something that I don't think there's going to be any middle ground. And looking through the reviews for this one on Goodreads and some other places where there's user reviews like Amazon, there really is very little middle ground. It's either people absolutely loved it or absolutely didn't. But I would absolutely recommend it. If you've gotten to this point in the episode and you've heard what the book is about, or you've read about the book in the bookstore, and you're intrigued, you should absolutely do it. Buy the ticket, take the ride, get the book, read it. You won't regret it.
Yeah, definitely. I think people will either love this book or hate it. And I have seen both. I've heard people really... So I feel like people either really, really liked it or they did not like it. So I would recommend it to most of my friends, but it's been talked about enough that I feel like most people have already at least heard of the book, because I kind of feel like it was like it's definitely a book talk. Like everyone recommends it, one of those books. So yeah, I mean, I would recommend it with some caveats there. Just, I don't think it's a book for everyone though. And I do think you have to go in knowing that if you're a history buff, you might be a little disappointed because you get a little bit, but not, I wouldn't consider this historical personally. There's enough of it, but it's a sliver. It's not the main aspect of the story. And well, I guess that might be spoiling it. So
see, this one is actually one of the ones, listeners, that is pretty hard to talk about in the spoiler-free section, because there's so many things in this book that could be spoilers.
Yeah, so I don't think I will mention that aspect.
So for those of you leaving us at this point, do not forget to give us a rating if you like us on either Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is that you choose to listen. And make sure you're following us on Facebook and Instagram. In both places, our handle is @BadassLitPod. We'd love to hear from you. If you've got a book you want us to read, let us know. If you've got an idea for a bonus episode, let us know. We'd love to hear from you guys. Now, before we go into the next part of our podcast, we're going to have a short preview of what is coming up. And just as a reminder, this is what's coming up in September. This will be the end of September's review.
We are reading The Alice Network by Kate Quinn, which was recommended to us by Sam. Thank you, Sam. Shout out. Thank you for the recommendation. I'm not going to say your last name because I feel like that's kind of personal, and I personally wouldn't want my crap out there. So anyways, preview. Here it is. 1947, the chaotic aftermath of World War II. American college girl Charlie St. Clair is pregnant, unmarried, and on the verge of being thrown out of her very proper family. She's also nursing a desperate hope that her beloved cousin Rose, who disappeared in Nazi-occupied France during the war, might still be alive. So when Charlie's parents banish her to Europe to have her little problem taken care of, Charlie breaks free and heads to London, determined to find out what happened to the cousin she loves like a sister. Flash, 1915. A year into the Great War, Eve Gardner burns to join the fight against the Germans and unexpectedly gets her chance when she's recruited to work as a spy. Sent into enemy-occupied France, she's trained by the mesmerizing Lily, a codenamed Alice, the Queen of Spies, who manages a vast network of secret agents right under the enemy's nose. 30 years later, haunted by the betrayal that ultimately tore apart the Alice Network, Eve spends her days drunk and secluded in her crumbly London house, until a young American barges in, uttering the name Eve hasn't heard in decades, and launches them both on a mission to find the truth, no matter where it leads.
Dun, dun, dun. And I'm really excited for this book. It's what I'm looking forward to, and it's one that one of our listeners was looking forward to. The contest we had a while back. This was the one that. This was the book that they picked to win in the contest. So,
hopefully they read along with us and make comments.
Yeah,
hint, hint, wink, wink.
Do it. So remember, guys, the second part of our podcast is an in-depth look at this book, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. So if you do want to read that, stop listening right now and come back when you are done.
Hi, I'm Bethany Finger, the host of Prince Kai Fan Pod, a Marissa Meyer Book Club podcast. Join me every week during my read-along journey through all of the books by author Marissa Meyer, one chapter at a time, spoiler-free. Each episode will feature a different guest, new fan art, and laughter and joy through reading. You can find Prince Kai Fan Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all other listening platforms. And now, back to the show.
Now, for those of you sticking around for the spoilers, here we go. So like always, we're going to open up this section of the podcast by talking about nominating and giving the Badass Character Award. Barbara, who would you nominate for The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue for the Badass Character?
Addie, the show. Just because she went through everything and never really gave up, and for outsmarting the devil himself. She gets the award. It's called The Long Game, and it's going to happen. So, yeah, she gets it. The show. Because she's a normal human who didn't get powers or doesn't have powers like he does. So I feel like he kind of cheats a little.
Well, it's a good thing this award is called the Badass Character Award, not the Badass Character with No Powers Award. Because I nominated, for me, it was a toss-up between Addie and Luke. For those of you that are still listening and haven't read the book, Luke is the name that Addie gives for the god in the dark, or the darkness, or the devil, or whatever he may be. It's never quite confirmed, but she gives him the name Luke, which is short for Lucifer.
No, it's not. It's not it's not.
I'm saying it is.
Okay.
So for me, it was a toss between the two of them. Addie.
Did she call him Lucian? Short for Lucian?
I don't think so. No, I think it was for Lucifer, but.
No, it's not.
That's what I'm saying. I'm sticking with that story.
Everyone hates you.
So for me, it was a toss-up between the two of them because, like Barbara said, Addie did go through all sorts of stuff. Just the sheer like human willpower to make it through 300 years of existence without being able to really have any kind of a relationship with anybody.
I'm sorry, are you not picking one? You have to pick.
I am picking one. So technically I picked both of them. So what I was going to do was say, because I picked both of them and you picked Addie, we're going to have to give the award to Addie, because that means Addie won a vote and a half of the Badass Character Award. Otherwise, it's going to be a toss-up and no one's going to win.
Okay, whatever.
Going to be a toss-up and nobody wins. So I thought Addie was a great character. Luke was more badass in some ways to me, but as Barbara pointed out,
as he should be, because he's the devil, so I would hope so.
He should have some pretty cool powers as the devil. I agree. So yes, the Addie LaRue, the title character, won the award for the Badass Character Award for this one. All right, so speaking of characters, before we dive into our normal questions that we do at the second part of the podcast, I want to do like a brief overview of the three main characters of the book. And Barbara, I'll let you start and give us a little overview of Addie LaRue.
Sure. So Addie is one of the two perspectives that you get for the chapters. And she, I would say, would be the main one.
I would agree.
Of the three characters and of the perspectives. You get more chapters in her perspective. And she is the girl that you follow throughout 300 years, kind of. Some chapters go back in the past, and you kind of learn how she deals with being forgotten by other people, and it's pretty much days of it. So yeah, you get a little bit of that history, but it's more her interaction and her relationship with Luke. And then obviously, fast forward to 2014, which is considered present in the book, is her relationship with Henry, the boy who can see her.
So for the second character on this list, I debated whether or not to have like the second quote-unquote main character be Luke or Henry. I lean towards Luke, though, because while he's not like a perspective character, whereas Henry, we do get some chapters from his perspective, I think Luke has more pages or words in the book overall that are attributed to him than Henry does, probably. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I'd say it's even between both of them, because honestly, it's Addie's relationship with both.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Two different relationships that both involve her.
Correct.
So we'll call them the main side characters then. Henry slightly more because he gets a perspective, I guess. But just to do a quick overview of Luke, he is the demon, devil thing in the dark that Addie makes a deal with in the 1600s in France to get out of her responsibilities at the time. And the way that he's referred to at the very beginning, it's like he's the one of the old gods, right? Like she warned the old woman in her village not to talk to the gods after dark. It's a different kind of god. And so that's what Luke is. And throughout the book, he manifests himself in different ways, and both monstrous and human-like. But overall, I mean, very Faustian.
Takes the form of who she pictured as someone she wanted to fall in love with, essentially. And he saw that and decided to be an asshole and turned it into himself. So that's how he presented himself to her.
Makes sense for the devil to want to be the person you desire most.
Your incarnation of whatever you want, yeah.
Yeah. But that's Luke in a nutshell. We'll get into him a whole lot more later. And then, Barbara, do you want to do a little bit of Henry?
Yeah, so Henry is like a 20-something-year-old that kind of not really knowing what he wants to do with his life that she meets and that remembers him. And I mean, this is the spoiler section, so he makes a deal with Luke. And that
What?
Funny. That is why he can see Addie. Their powers, their curses, whatever you want to call it.
I think the book just calls it their deal.
Yeah, the deal. Their curse, they kind of...
Yeah, a little bit of both.
Curses, actually. So their curses kind of cancel each other out because Addie always, like, after she made the deal, she realized that she just wants someone to love her, and Henry is the only person that remembers her and who can, in fact, fall in love with her or at least have more than just one day with her. And Henry's curse is that he wanted it to be perfect for anyone or everyone that looks at him, and Addie's the only one that sees him for who he actually is, faults and all. And that's pretty much who Henry is.
So that's just a brief look at the three main characters. We'll be going over them in a lot more detail later. But for those of you that are still listening, if for some reason are still listening and haven't read the book, you should still be warned because we've already dropped a lot of it. Barbara dropped a huge spoiler there at the beginning.
Yeah,
so
sure did.
Bummer if you're still here. But anyway, so first question, like always, what did you like about the book? What did you dislike about it? And was there a specific point in the story that really hooked you in? For me, I liked pretty much everything about this book. The characters were very well written, and their development arc over the story was great. To be fair, Addie had a much longer development arc since she technically started in the 1600s all the way to 2014 New York City. But all the characters are very well developed. Luke was an incredible villain. I really liked the way that she wrote him. He was always evil. Like there was never a moment in the book where you weren't like, there was never a time where you're like, oh, wow, he's changed. He's such a great person or great thing now. And like, he's still evil and it's still there, even in the moments where you might be drawn to his charms at times, or you might see a little bit of his desired humanity kind of peeking through. But that evil core is still there. And the way that she developed him was really good. And there's Henry, poor Henry. Like Barbara said earlier, his deal or his curse, he wanted everybody to want him. He wanted to be wanted.
He wanted to be enough.
He wanted to be enough, right? And so everybody sees him as exactly what they want to see. So if that's like a potential romantic partner, then it's like exactly the guy or the guy that they're looking for. And if it's maybe an older woman who's just lost her son, maybe she'll see her son in him because she's...
Or his best friend sees the perfect friend.
Yep. And a little bit of the romantic relationship, I think, there too. But are you talking about...
the girl? She's a lesbian.
I thought you were talking about Robbie.
No.
Yeah, I thought you were talking about that best friend. Anyway, but yeah, I mean... Seeing Henry's beginning, like his broken relationship with his family, his string of exes that he's never quite good enough for, it's all heartbreaking. And then, like we just said, he gets the exact opposite. Everybody wants him now, but not really him. They see what they want and not the true Henry. And there's definitely parts of the book where it flashes back to the beginning of his deal where you might think like, oh, wow, aspects of this deal like sound pretty great. Like Henry... he can get any job he wants. He can get any girl or boy he wants. He can have almost any life he wants, except none of it's going to be real. Like cheating at anything in life, sure, you succeeded and you got that dream girl, job, life, house, whatever. But if that success will always be stained by that cheat. And I feel like that was like the core of Henry's deal, is that he will get all these things, but he'll know that he'll never know if he really accomplished or really... It was really because of him. And that was definitely heartbreaking to see. In a lot of ways, his story was more sad than Addie's, but I digress.
So, like I already mentioned, I fell in love with the words in this book. It's kind of hard to explain, but Victoria has such a way with words. Like, I feel like I fell in love with the book because of that. Like, she paints such a beautiful picture. So, it's funny because, like, we've already read one of her books, Darker Shade of Magic, and that book and this book are so different. And even the way that she wrote, like, yes, that one's a really cool book and the way that she wrote is beautiful, but this is just, it seems more lyrical, more artsy. which makes sense because there is a lot of art in this book, and art plays a role in this book. So I just kind of wanted to preface that, like the difference between those two. I really fell in love with Addie as a character. I loved Luke's character. Obviously, I love me a very well-written, quote-unquote, bad guy, and he just did it for me. I just loved to hate him. And all these side characters were really interesting as well to me for the most part. And I can empathize with Henry, and I do like him as a character, but I think between the other two, he wasn't as strong for me as the other two main characters. Like, I really enjoyed him. He was a great character, but maybe it's because we don't get too much of him. Obviously, we do parts of it, and the parts that we do, it's like really depressing and sad. And you just feel for him as a human, you just empathize with him. But and obviously he does have really good character growth and all that stuff, not to say that he doesn't. It's just, I feel between like the other two, he was maybe I would put him in third favorite, I guess, is if I'm ranking them, which I probably shouldn't be doing, which is awful of me to do. Oops. But so yes, that's how I feel about Henry. So I loved all the characters. Obviously, they were amazing. I really enjoyed the art aspect of the book, too, and how Victoria tied that in with Addie's curse and how she was still able to leave her as an Addie, still able to leave her mark through different art forms. It just shows you how important art is to us as humans. And so I felt that was really a cool little twist in the book, and it was really fun to read about. The few small gripes that I did have with this book are just that I thought we were going to get more historical moments, like we've already mentioned, but I understand that that wasn't the point of this book. Like, that was not the point of this book. Yes, she's from like the 1700s or whatever, like that. It was more to show, like, I feel like her progress through it and her issues with what her deal was and how she kind of learned to skirt the edges of her curse, and kind of like her prodding the proverbial wall of how far can I take this, and that comes through with the art form. That's how she leaves her mark in the world. The biggest issue I think I had is just, I just don't understand how, or I find it hard to believe that Addie lived for 300 years and didn't meet any POCs. Like, Bia's the only one. And Bia is Beatrice, and she is one of Henry's two best friends. But she's the only POC character that is mentioned in the book. And it would have been nice to see more. And I just kind of feel like it's hard to understand, like, 300 years and you didn't run into anyone, like, no, not one. And I get that, like, oh, back then, like, she couldn't, whatever, the times are different, blah, blah, blah. But, like, come on, like, one mention. But as a POC myself, it would be nice to kind of see yourself represented a little more. And as far as getting hooked in, honestly, this book kind of took me a hot second to really get in. At first, I was a little, not bored, but like, okay, like, I want to get to like the juicy bit where she makes the deal with the devil and then she gets damned. Like, I wanted that part, and you kind of get a background of like the why. So I understand it's the why she did what she did. She did not want to she didn't want to have the Bell life, essentially, like this little small town. You live here, you stay here, you die here. There's nothing, and she wanted to see the world. She wanted to experience life outside of her tiny little town. So that's why I understand it was a little bit slow to get into it, but then I got really invested in after the fact. Long-winded answer.
It's all right. I mean, I agree with you. That was really the only, like, quote unquote slow part of the book was the very beginning. So moving on from there, let's talk about Addie a little bit. What were the best and worst things, in your opinion, about Addie's invisible, quote unquote, invisible life? What is the emotional toll of being unable to imprint herself on the heart and mind of anybody? And is there any time that it may give her an advantage?
So getting to experience the world as it grew would be so cool for me. Wait, are we answering this like what is the best and worst part about Addie's life, like for us or for her? I guess it should have...
I mean, I think so I took it as just like my opinion is what the best and worst things for her. Not like if we lived her life, what would be the best and worst.
I answered it.
At least that's how I took it. But if you took it a different way, you can answer it a different way.
I was like getting to experience the world. But okay, fine. I still think that would be for her too. I feel like she enjoyed seeing the world change because she did want to see the world. So I guess I would still keep my answer. I understand that she just couldn't like prance around the world, given the times and her being a woman. And she even says like, oh, to be a man, like it would have been cool if I was born a man with this deal because pretty much I could do whatever the heck I wanted with no consequences. Like she couldn't during certain ages, like 17, even 1800s, I think it was, like she couldn't walk around as a female by herself during the day because people would think she was a whore, right?
Yeah.
Like is that what
prostitute.
they called it? That's it, the prostitute, because women back then weren't allowed to do that.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting.
She even dressed up as a man to make it easier for
one point to do that. Yeah. But I think getting to experience like how she did all the new places and just seeing how the different cities changed, and she definitely like goes back home a few times up to a certain point and just sees how different her little village grew and how like time just took away like her Estelle's house, who was a big role model for her. So it's just that part was really cool. I think one of maybe the cooler parts of her, and obviously getting to do all that, never running out of time, and then first chances. Like she was trying to get into this like high-end club, and she was doing it like 20 times, meeting the owner of this club or bar or whatever it was, like this society of smart people. And she's like, oh yes, like I can just do it, multiple times until I say the right things and be able to go. And so that, I feel like she would say that would be the cool part. The worst part, obviously, is just not leaving your mark on the world at all. And that includes people not remembering you. It's super lonely. And then not being able to leave literal marks on anything. Like she tried writing something down, it would disappear. She would try to leave a stain on a couch or something with red wine. Like 2 seconds, it would disappear. Like it was like she was not even ever there. And as someone who did enjoy art, like she enjoyed drawing and stuff as a kid, she really missed that and she couldn't do that. So I feel like that would take a hell of a toll on someone, and you can see, I feel like in 2014, Addie, how she's still dealing with it and how, yeah, she's come to terms with it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't make her sad. And I do think the book does a good job of showing the benefits and drawbacks of her curse. Yeah,
for me, that was probably the best thing that I thought, at least the best benefit she got of her deal was that constant redos. The situation that you mentioned earlier, Barbara, where she was trying to get into that like highly desired salon in Paris to have discussions with like the leading minds of the time, like Voltaire was there. And that was where she got to have like, took her 10 times to figure out exactly what the woman needed to hear to let her come. And she got to do that. So that's great. But it's also it's like everything that's a great thing is also has the other side of it. And it's also the worst thing, because even if that first impression that she finally made, no one's going to remember that, or the perfectly timed moment that you had with somebody, it's gone because nobody remembers that except for her. There were countless heartbreaking moments throughout this book about Addie's life, but the one related to her deal that probably hit me the hardest was at the very beginning, actually, when she's new to her deal. She goes back to her town and her parents don't recognize her, and they're even afraid of her because she's like a stranger in their small village in 1600s France, rural France, and they're afraid of her. And she goes and sees her best friend that she's known her whole life, and because her best friend is charitable, she can convince her to be nice and have like a moment. But the second she leaves the room to go get something and comes back, then she's terrified of her because she's sitting there with her with her baby, and it's a stranger in her house. And that would be hard at first. Like after 300 years, it might get a little bit easier to, understand the deal. But at the beginning, I feel like with her family and friends that she grew up with, that was the one that hit me the hardest as far as stuff. But not being able to imprint herself, like Barbara said, carries a huge emotional toll. She can never have a deeper connection with someone than she's able to make in a single day or night or however long she can spend with this person before they step away long enough to forget, which it's implied is literally like seconds. Like you get up and walk out of the room and then come back and who is she? So that part of it is definitely pretty crazy. I guess the only lasting relationship she had was with Luke, the devil, which is why we get so much of him in the book. And that would be too much to bear for most people just in and of itself. But it gives her an advantage in moments where it's beneficial to disappear too. So there was a scene in the beginning, I think, I can't remember if it was Paris or if it was a different town, where she was starving. Even though she didn't need to eat, she felt the pain of hunger. And so she was trying to find food. It was the largest town close to like her village, I guess. And she tried to steal some bread and she gets caught. And it looks like, she's going to get hurt. They're going to kill her or whatever they do. And then she gets away just long enough for them to forget and not know what happened. And so that's one benefit, is if you have to live this life in the shadows that you're kind of forced into, then at least you're able to escape the negatives as well. So that's one thing I could think of where it gave her an advantage. I think the disadvantages are much greater than the advantages in this case, but that is one advantage.
I mean, she gets to live forever. That's an advantage, I guess, depending on...
Right, yeah. Depending on what you consider living, which is obviously the devil's goal in this case. But anyway, fast forward, 2013, 2014, finally meet Henry. Were you surprised when we got to the point of the book where Henry revealed that he not only made a deal with the demon, but that he made a deal with the same one, with Luke, or did you figure it out way in advance? And before I ask Barbara to answer this, I'm pretty confident I already know the answer, because for those of you that have listened to us in the past, she's like the queen predictor of all things stories. But
so stupid you say that. No, I thought it was obvious, pretty obvious that was going to be what it, honestly, not even reading the book, like from the back, I feel like that's a blatantly obvious. No.
Maybe
like,
for you, queen predictor.
No, come on. Like, you read a few chapters in, at least for like the deal with him. And then you're like, okay, well, I remember there's supposed to be a kid that she's going to meet and he remembers her. Well, it's probably because he made a deal. So, and you can even figure it out because of the tone of the book. Like, this is not a happy book. So obviously he made a deal with, the King of Darkness here. And it's not going to be a pretty deal because he deals with souls.
Right.
So I feel like it was pretty obvious.
So I wouldn't say it was obvious from like the get-go. Like, I didn't read the back of the book and go, yep, that's going to be it. But once we're introduced to Henry, and it's revealed that, he is the one who can remember her and say her name and all of that stuff, then that was the only thing that really made sense, is that either he had made a deal. So my two thoughts were either he made a deal or Luke was manipulating him to screw with her, and it turns out it was kind of both. But those were the two things I thought it might have been up front. So at that point, I did expect something, and then we obviously find out it was a deal, which was somewhat expected. But the heartbreaking nature of Henry's deal, I did not expect going into it. I figured he made a deal. I didn't think it would start with, almost suicide on the roof of his building.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that was revealed much, much later.
Yeah. Which was, I'm glad we got to see that, like the flashback of Henry making the deal and all, kind of like the life that he lived before he met Addie while he was still part of this deal. And so, yeah, so I did guess it, but not just by reading the back of the book. Back to Addie, one of the things that she's obviously dealing with, and Barbara touched on it a little bit before, is that she can't make an impact. She can't write. She can't change anything. She can't break anything. So that also means that she's living without a bank account, a phone, a permanent address, or even a hotel room where she can stay regularly. She's reduced to pilfering and theft to quell her physical suffering. Is it a blessing or a curse that she only has to worry about momentary suffering and not survival? For me, this is a hard question to answer, because you start thinking about like all the things that she can't have. And the more and more that list adds up, the more you realize that, I don't think that it's a blessing that she has to worry only about momentary suffering. I think in some ways, I guess she's spared some long-term suffering, but even then, not really. She had to watch her family and friends slowly, die, or like she came back to visit and they were dead. And so that's certainly not a blessing. And I think the ability to avoid momentary suffering, even if we're talking like physical things, like, whether it's hunger or like being stabbed or something, like violence happening to her and that not really lasting. I mean, while that might be a blessing in the moment, like, oh, yep, I got shot and I didn't die, which she didn't get shot. That's an example that I made. But I don't think that outweighs the breadth of everything that she's not able to do. At least that's how I look at it.
Even though she doesn't have to worry about survival in the strictest sense, aka like nothing can kill her. Although I'm not gonna lie, if I was her, I may have like tried jumping off a high building just to see what would happen. You know, like, obviously she's gonna feel all of that, so that like, does that mean she's gonna feel like everything break in her body and then slowly come back together? She just pops up. Like, how does that work? I was very curious about that.
Probably.
Anyways.
Like, you'd probably like Wolverine, like, he feels all the pain, but then he has to slowly like heal.
Right.
Yeah.
But like Luke said in the book, there are worse things than death. So I think it's both. I feel like, yeah, she can still feel a stab wound while trying to steal some money for food. You know, like, she got stabbed and she felt that, like, it was being stabbed, but it doesn't kill her. So like I said, she feels, if she jumped off a building, like, will she feel that? You know, like, curious to know. Anyways, I feel like after a while you would maybe feel a little bit like desensitized to all, like, not harkening back to our last podcast where like that dude in 13, the bad guy, didn't feel a crap. It's like, after a while, would you feel a little desensitized? Would you be like a crazy psycho because, you can't die even though you can feel the pain? But it's funny because Addie doesn't seem to lose her humanity because of that, and whatever Luke believes, because he calls her not a human. And I think in a certain form, like, no, she technically isn't, because she's pretty much a ghost. Like, she really is. She's a ghost. If you don't see her, you don't remember her. But that she doesn't lose her humanity to people. Like, she still empathizes. She still knows and experiences what it is to be fundamentally human.
And I looked at some of that, like, I kind of drew comparisons to like a vampire story almost, where like you have like a lot of times you'll see become vampire, young vampires still like clinging on to their humanity, and slowly over time they start to lose a little bit of it. And I think maybe we were seeing her lose a little bit of it at the end of the book, like start to kind of realize, like you said, that she's not a human anymore. So that was kind of one of the comparisons that I thought of, was just similar to like how vampire stuff is written in that way. Barbara brought up Luke, so let's talk about the struggles between Addie and Luke. There was an intense power struggle, cat and mouse game, whatever you want to call it, going on with them throughout the book. What are your thoughts on that? What makes Luke a quote-unquote master of seduction? And how does Addie reclaim her power, her agency, her choice, ability to make her own choices over the course of these 300 years?
Yeah, I definitely love their relationship. I feel like that's one of my favorite parts of the book, was their relationship, the dynamic between both of them. I mean, I'm not talking about a romantic relationship here. I'm talking about just a relationship between character A and character B. So didn't really care about the romantic aspect of it, but the cat and mouse game that they played throughout the whole book was just chef's kiss. Like, amazing, amazing, amazing. And Luke is a master of seduction, and I don't mean like seduction as in like, hey baby, come and get this piece of meat here. I'm talking about his way with words, obviously, and how he can seduce you into doing things like pretty much selling your soul to him, in the premise of thinking that you have figured it out and you outsmarted him. Like, that's what I mean by seduction. Like, he just has a way with people, with words, with things, with everything, that just makes you want to be like, yes, I'm going to hang off of everything you say. That type of seduction. And the best part is because he truly knows what people want, and then he knows how to play them like a fiddle in his own twisted way. Once again, that's what makes him great. And, he's a master in everything, and he knows how to bend people to his will. Okay, so how does Addie reclaim her power? I feel like throughout the whole book, she learns how to read him, like by studying everything about him, his mannerisms, reading between the lines of what he says. A good quote is, not from the book, but your silence speaks volumes. So that too. his emotions and like the hard lessons that he tries teaching her, like she picks up on all of that and slowly just learns how to play the game the way that he was playing her. And I just love that. And I love their relationship. I feel like that was my favorite part of the book because of how she grows. Like she was the little doe-eyed little girl, not little, she was, I don't know, 24 or 25 or something, or 23, something like that, who kind of got hardened by life because of him. Like he twisted her words, as one does when you're the devil, and didn't give her what she wanted. And she kind of learns how to live with that. And then she tries like outsmarting him in parts of their history together, and he always one-ups her. And then she's like, okay, well fine, I'm going to learn this because of this, and then she slowly builds like this knowledge of who he is as a devil, of a god or whatever. And at the end just like slams it in his face, and I just loved it. It's amazing. Love their relationship.
So I'm right there with you on that. Their relationship was one of my favorite parts of the book. The games they played throughout the centuries, him seeing her as something to be played with, her secretly, like you said, like reading him the whole time, learning his ways, figuring out the way he thinks. Like you said too, he's not just a master of seduction. Obviously, he is a master of seduction in the sense that he can seduce anybody to do whatever he wants them to do, which is, it's kind of the name of the game when you're trying to get people to sell their soul. But he's a master of all. Like he shows many times throughout the book, there is hardly anything that he can't do. Like there's scenes where, like, there's a particular scene in New Orleans where he has a restaurant that's completely cleared out. No one can go in. All the employees are still there, and he's like zombified them where they're helping, but just like kind of standing there to the side with blank looks in their eyes, waves his hand, throws the door open. I mean, he's all powerful, is definitely shown. But with the only exception you really hear throughout the whole book is that he can't be outside during the day. Can't be outside during the day. There was a scene in New Orleans where he said he had to go because it was
light can't touch.
Correct.
So if you have a blacked out curtain window type thing, he can be in that room with you.
But he can't be outside during the day. That was
sure. Yeah. That, and he can't love Michael.
But yeah, well, yeah. He thinks he can, but I'll touch on that in a minute. He is all powerful though, and he believes himself to be 100 moves ahead of any human he encounters, like it's some master chess game. And to his credit, 9 times out of 10, it seems that he is that many moves ahead of everybody. But he does also mention multiple times throughout the book that it doesn't take much to get a soul. He doesn't feel like he has to do very much convincing, which we see a little bit of. And over time, Addie also learns to read his eyes, which I thought was a really cool thing, where she could start to figure out like what the different colors meant, and figure out what emotion he was feeling, or like if he thought he was like, being awesome, or he was succeeding at whatever he was trying to do. Although over time, so she reclaims her power, I think, by just learning more about him, by spending time with him, learning who he is, what he wants. Like Barbara said, works towards beating him in his own game, which at the end, it's kind of left open whether she did or not. I think that she probably did. But for most of her 300 years on this earth, he's been trying to convince her to surrender. That's the word that comes up over and over again. He wants her just surrender, just give up. You're a shell of yourself. No one knows you. It's not worth going. Just surrender. And she never does. And then on the flip side of that, she shows him the benefits almost inadvertently of humanity, which at times almost seems like while he's trying to draw her into the dark, she's almost like at the other end of the rope trying to pull him out of it, because it seems like at times he wants to almost be more human, to have a connection. He thinks he has this connection with her that he calls quote unquote love, which is, she tells him over and over it's not what it is. But yeah, like Barbara said, she eventually does beat him at his own game of twisted words. Maybe. Moving on from there, the belief is a huge role in this story, in this narrative, specifically in the shaping of foundational identities, whether that's the LaRue family's rigid Christianity, or Estelle, the old woman from her village and her faith in the old gods, to Addie, whose belief in a fantasy, shapes her physical representation of Luke. And then there's Henry, whose loss of belief feels him leaving lost. So it's obviously a big overarching theme here in this story. What are your thoughts on the theme of belief in the story? And do you believe in the existence of gods that answer after dark? I think belief does obviously play a huge role. The stark contrast between the light and the dark, Addie's traditional rigid Christian upbringing and her willingness to turn to the dark in desperation when the other gods don't listen. And I know that, she doesn't do it on purpose. She's trying to, like, right before the end of the day, trying to convince the other god, like the river gods and the gods of the forest, to listen. And then dark happens and she ends up getting Luke. But she doesn't say no. But yeah, Addie had to believe in her fantasy, or else the reality of her deal would have broken her. And with Henry should have believed in himself more. And his deal allowed him to do just that, but at the cost of his relationship with Addie. Eventually, all of the scenes where we got to see Luke showing his true self to Addie were also extremely well written. Like whether that was the scene where he rips her through the darkness and then out of the darkness, and they appear in like a music room, and there's a man there playing the piano. It turns out to be Beethoven, and they're there to claim his soul. Or it's when they're talking about in the theater, and he mentions that like Shakespeare, and it's like, oh, well, yeah, I claimed his soul too, and acts like all these like great artists throughout history have all sold their souls to him to be remembered. The irony of all that, I guess, in this story is that Addie sold her soul and doesn't get to be remembered. She gets to live forever, but her things don't get to, which is kind of the flip side of what Beethoven and Shakespeare had sold theirs for. Or even there's the scene with the old shopkeeper when Addie first sees the slightly less monstrous version, where he just goes up and says, hey, it's time. And she's like, yeah, yep, it sure is. And just allows herself be swallowed by the dark. One last thing on the belief that I thought was really cool. It was a scene that definitely stuck out with me. Was they go to a church at one point, and the internal monologue of Addie is she's thinking that maybe can Luke go into a church? Like she's always wondered, like if the house of God would keep him out, or if he would, could go in there. And unsurprisingly, he just walked right through the front door and walked right in and sat down. And they kind of had a discussion at that point about like the difference between him and God. And he makes a comment that it's like, we all deal in souls. I just pay up front for mine, and he keeps his on a shelf. And I thought that was a really, really neat quote that kind of jumped out when talking about belief.
So I think Addie and Henry are a good contrast to one another, just regarding belief. Addie didn't really believe in her parents' religion, but did in Estelle's, of the old gods, as she calls them. And that's so much so that she prays to them, and she gets so desperate that she offers her soul in exchange for what she wanted to one of the gods that Estelle told her not to. Don't pray to the gods after dark, is what she says. And I guess I should preface that with, like, she sold her soul in exchange for what she wanted, or at least what she thought she wanted. He twisted her words, obviously, and she got cursed, or what she calls her little curse. And then what I find interesting is that as soon as she saw the darkness, she knew exactly what it was or who he was. She also believes in herself, like in her ability to keep resisting Luke every time he offered, like, just to give up. Come on, like, this is a horrible way of living. Are you sure you even want to do this? To keep living and even playing the long game to win her soul back from him at the end. Whereas in Henry, in contrast, literally was a theology major dropout who didn't even believe he had made a deal with the quote-unquote devil until much later. Even when he saw him, he's like, nah, it's the make-believe. I just made all this up in my head. You're not real. And I just find that funny because he studied all different religions and beliefs and couldn't wrap his mind around meeting the darkness until much later. And he also didn't believe in himself and what he could offer to the world or the people around him. And, that's why Luke was able to manipulate him into selling his soul, because all he wanted was to be good enough for these people, because he felt like he wasn't, like he never believed in himself and realized that he was good enough for the people that mattered in his life.
Yeah, 100%. And the one thing I just thought of too, that I think it's the one thing the one thing of Henry's deal that bothered me was that, Luke brags many times throughout the book about how easy it is to get souls. And then he gets Henry's deal, like, while he's like blackout drunk. Like there's
So
got to be.
some would say that is not considered consent.
I was going to say
And
there's
actually in law, that's not considered consent if you're inhibited. So if I were to sell you like my left pinky while drunk, and you're like, no, here you go, she said it, it wouldn't really fly because I was inhibited.
I was going to say there's got to be a consent conversation you could have there about the selling of your soul while blackout drunk. But
yeah.
Anywho, speaking of Henry, do you think that Henry and Addie were actually in love, or were they only bonded by their circumstances in something that they called love?
I mean, I feel like love comes in all shapes and sizes. So I think in the purest sense, yes, they were in love. Addie so desperately wanted the human connection of being remembered that when Henry was able to give that to her, it was easy for her to fall for him, because outside of Luke, she didn't have anyone else that had that. So it's just an instant connection there. You know, she finally got to experience how messy love actually is as well. I do think she thought it was one thing and realized it was another. And as far as for Henry, like after wishing to be enough for everyone and realizing that wasn't truly what he wanted, when he met someone who actually saw him for him, you know, faults and all, you know, he fell for that. I think they both learn from each other. I also don't think this is like your stereotypical like love story though, and I'm actually okay with that, because I feel like love is messy, and just to, you know, like they knew each other, but not for very long, because, you know, poor Henry only had a year to live, and by the time he met her, I think he had like 5 months or something like that left on his little ticker.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like in your stereotypical what is it, Hollywood love story, like, no, I don't think they have that. Because it's funny, because she even mentions like she was expecting, or I think she was thinking love would be like that passionate, like all like, I think she even said like burning love type thing, and that's not what she had with him. And she said, you know, will I settle for God, what, instead of burning, she used a different word, and now I'm like, it's escaping me. But it was such a good way of describing the different types of love that there are. Like, love shouldn't be all encompassing, and that's how, which is funny because that's how Luke thinks love is. He's like, it's selfish. Love is selfish. Love is all these things. And then she's like, no, like, you have no idea. Like, if you truly loved me, like, you would let me go out of the deal. Like, you would set me free. And then he's like, no, I don't want to do that, because I love you. I want you to be with me. And she's like, yeah, you don't get it. That's selfish love. It's not true love. Long-winded answer. Yeah, I do think they were in love. It's just a different type of love.
So for me, I think that to Addie, it is the closest thing to romantic love that she can or will ever experience, just because of the nature of her deal. And obviously, like Barbara said, like the circumstances of her relationship with Luke, that's definitely not love. It's selfish possession, if anything. But realistically, I think that her and Henry were bonded by circumstance. He could see her, he could remember her, and that's all she wanted. And she wanted him for who he actually was, and that's what he was looking for. So I think that they found things in each other, and I think that, you know, Addie got to experience, you know, a relationship, because that's, and it is maybe as silly as that sounds, like she had never gotten to experience a relationship. She had not had a relationship with another human being since, you know, the 1600s with her parents and her friends and the other villagers in her hometown. And so I don't think that it was love. I think it was something else. I do think they were in a relationship. I think they genuinely cared about each other. But was the story of the two of them, was it a great, you know, quote unquote love story? Yeah, I really liked it. I thought it was well done. Do I think that they were in love? No, I don't think so in this case. Moving on from there, let's talk about the book length. So was the book the right length? Were there any parts that you wanted the author to expand on, or sections that you thought should be shorter? For me, I think the book was the right length. I would have liked maybe like Barbara and I have said it a couple times now, more about Addie's life throughout history. But I also get that that isn't the story that V.E. Schwab was trying to tell with this one. So I would have loved some expansion there, but I also totally get, why that section of the book was intentionally left out. The only time for me that the book like really dragged, and I know we touched on this a little bit before too, was at the very beginning. But it was only a little bit, and it's somewhat expected, to set up the story and to set up the characters, introduce you to everybody, and give you an idea of what's going on. And so it didn't drag the book down by any means, but in scraping to try to answer this question as to like parts I wanted the author to expand on or make shorter, that's all I could come up with.
So I think it was the right length. I would have liked to experience the different and more historical moments. Once again, already I feel like I keep droning on about that. I also would have liked to know a little bit more about Luke, actually, since he was such an interesting character to me. I get that he is supposed to be mysterious and that we're not supposed to know too much of him, but he was such an interesting character. I would have liked to get maybe a little history about him, but I mean, is there a history on the darkness? I feel like it might turn into too cheesy or something like that. So I once again understand. So maybe I just wanted more of him because I would love to see where they go. But besides that, I don't really think anything needed to be shorter. I get why the beginning was a bit slower, just to kind of set up who Addie was before the curse and who she is after. So I don't have an issue with anything else. I thought it was perfect length. I just wanted more.
The one thing, I know you said that you couldn't have the history of Luke, but the one thing that I just thought of when you said that would have been kind of neat to see is maybe some fictional folklore, folklore, quote unquote, that's attributed to him, maybe, that was written by different cultures throughout history. So how we got those little tidbits of art for Addie, the things that she impacted.
Yeah.
Okay. It would have been neat to see a contrasting thing where you get a short story about a Native American tribe interacting with their version of him, or different cultures around the world. It would have been kind of neat that would have been kind of cool.
Yeah, that would have been cool. Yeah.
But
ideas for next book.
book.
You're welcome. She needs our help.
Right. Who is your favorite character in this one?
So obviously Addie, but with Luke as a very close second. I just loved how resilient Addie was. Yes, she had her faults, but her inner strength really did it for me. I loved seeing her grow into herself. Like I stated, she just started out as this naive, doe-eyed girl and turned into a hardened person who still cared for people, though, no matter what she'd been through. And the fact that she was willing to go toe to toe with the devil just made me beam like a little proud friend when that happened. And that last chapter with her and him made me so giddy, envisioning what she had in store for him was just awesome. I just, my little brain went wild and be like, yes, girl, get it, go. So for sure, she was my favorite character. I just, the inner strength that she had, it's not she can move boulders with just her mind strength, or she has rippling muscle strength. It's just inner strength of
willpower.
And her core belief in herself. And every time that she felt like she was going to give up and give in to him asking her, she would be like, no, because I saw an elephant, or no, I saw the ocean. I want to experience these things. And then she just remembers that she can keep going. So her, for sure, hands down. And of course, just him, because he's love to hate him. But she wins.
So I can actually attest to the last thing that Barbara said about that last chapter making her giddy and very excited. Because for the first time, I think, since we started this podcast, we not only finished the book at the same time, but finished the book in the same evening and got to talk about it. And you were definitely very excited after that happened. But for me, Luke was my favorite character. I think he was an amazingly written villain. I mean, I guess it's easy to have an amazingly written villain when your source material is the devil. But
I wouldn't consider him a villain. He is So when I think of villain, I think like, mwahaha. Like, he doesn't like war, like he mentions. Like, he's just
But if we're talking
agent of chaos.
But if we're talking about like alignment, like moral alignment, he is evil. There's no situation where he falls in the neutral or good camp. I mean, he is an evil character.
I would say maybe chaotic neutral.
Chaotic neutral?
Yeah.
Maybe. I think more leaning towards evil. I won't call him a villain though. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really liked the way that she described him. I liked that like he wasn't just like in some stories, like especially Faustian stories, like where he wasn't just the demon that popped up at the crossroads, or he wasn't like any of the other stereotypical things you see. Like he was the way that like she described, like he was the dark, he was the bump in the night, he was the sticks breaking in the woods when it's pitch black over your shoulder. He was the like all these different ways that she described like how he was darkness. It wasn't just that he was in the dark. No, he was the dark. And I thought that was really cool. So yeah, I really, really liked the character. I liked Addie too, to be fair, but I really liked the way Luke was written and the way she described him and his personality and all that. So, oh, and also I forgot I wanted to mention, I wanted to give a shout out to my favorite side characters. I feel like we haven't talked a lot about the side characters so far. And mine personally were, I really liked Henry's friends. I know, which is funny because I didn't pick Henry as my favorite character, but I really liked Henry's two best friends, Robbie and Bee. Getting to see their interaction with Henry and then getting to see, I guess, like the struggles in their relationship, Henry and Addie's, when he obviously and she wants to be able to hang out with the friends, but then like they've got to like figure out what to do when she's introduced herself to them like 20 times or something. And Henry trying to figure out how to keep them from leaving the room so they don't forget when they're hanging out at like somebody's house or a bar. But also the characters themselves are really neat too. Like, throughout the story, Bee is working at the bookstore with Henry kind of while she works on her thesis, and Robbie's an actor and former relationship of Henry's, and so getting to see like the dynamics of his group were also cool for his perspective times in the book.
I feel bad for Henry. I feel like we haven't really mentioned him too much except for the beginning. Like, he's not a bad character. Like I said, it's just between the other two, like he kind of I mean, I'm sure maybe there's someone out there who like really understands, not even understand, like I understand, I empathize, I get it. Like, everyone has those cloudy days, everyone has those, I mean, it is what it is, those depressive moments in your life. So and honestly, like reading his chapters and those parts were what, like, I didn't cry at all, but like those parts, like that's the depressing part of the book, and that's when the fantasy aspect gets ripped away, and then you see truly experience that part of life as a human.
Oh no, he was incredible. I mean, Henry was a great character, and if this question was worded like written, which character do you relate to the most, it would be Henry, because it's going to be difficult for most people. Right. At least for me, it would be Henry, because
I relate to Luke.
Okay, well, that's terrifying, and we should redefine our relationship maybe. But I mean, I would definitely say I relate to Henry, like going through like college and trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, and like the overwhelming feeling of like
feeling lost.
Like,
what do you want to do? Like, what are you good for? What are you good for? What are you good at? Or feeling like you're not good enough. Like that, I feel like.
What are you good for? Was that was an okay thing to say, because that's probably how he felt. Like he felt like he wasn't good enough for anybody. And I think everybody has had a time in their life where they felt like they weren't good enough. And so I think in some ways, Henry was a lot of feelings that everybody has, and kind of maybe turned up to 10 at times but I really liked Henry's character.
I did too. I don't want people to think he's boring or anything like that. Like, he's not. I thought he was a very interesting character, but just in this aspect of between those two, they kind of outshine him. And this is because he's just normal. He's a normal kid going through this crap that everyone feels like. And me as a person, like, I want to shy away from that stuff. Like, just like how I don't like reading depressing news, like, like I was like, oh no, Henry, you're making me sad for you. Like, I just want to wrap him in a little blanket and tell him it's going to be okay.
Yeah. I mean, Henry even jokes at one point in the book, like when he and Addie are in the relationship, that they're like talking about things, and he jokes like, how can I ever, compete with someone who's lived for over 300 years? And that's a good way to think about it here too. Is like Addie's story is way longer in the grand scope of things. So, and like Barbara just said, his story is just more normal every day, with the exception of a deal with the devil.
Yeah, just that little small.
Just a little thing, yeah. So, moving on from there, I know I briefly mentioned his friend B's thesis, but her project that she was working on was she eventually starts to see Addie in different pieces of art throughout time. And I think she was an art history major. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, Barbara, but I think that was her major that she was working on her thesis for. But as that starts to unfold and you realize like she's seeing Addie and she's seeing this stuff show up, what did you discover about the power of art to preserve hidden truths? And in what way is Addie's identity, like quote unquote, written in the stars? I thought this was a really, really cool part of the plot. Slowly realizing that Addie has made her mark throughout history through different artists and paintings and sculptures and song. And she's kind of like, she figures out that her deal, the hard rule is that you can't leave an imprint, but she feels like she can bend it a little bit by kind of influencing somebody else to create this art, or maybe paint her or something like that. And that's where B starts to see the commonality is these paintings of the quote unquote unknown woman, or the one who got away. And they all have the thing that's described throughout the book is like 7 freckles on Addie's cheek that look kind of like the stars. I think overall though, that speaks to the eternal nature of art. And there was a line from the book that's brought up a lot when they're talking about like her bending the rules and getting to do this. And it's that ideas are wilder than memories. She might not get to leave memories, but she can plant ideas. And that allowed her to do this. And art and ideas could live forever. So seeing B start to piece this together for her thesis was really cool. The first person in 300 years to notice a pattern in the art, to see the freckles of Addie's face shining like stars through each thing that she's looking at. And then on the flip side, the somewhat cruel irony for both of them is that they actually know one another. And every time from when B figures this out until the end of the book, like she always mentions like, you look kind of like this thing, like or she mentions like about her freckles and
timeless. She calls
her timeless. So she makes the connection in her head, but she never gets to that next step where she can actually figure it out because of the nature of Addie's curse. But yeah, I thought it was a really cool part of the story.
Yeah, I definitely love this aspect of the book. After the first part, so just in case you're still listening to us and you haven't seen the book or you haven't read the book, the chapter, so the book is like broken into parts, and each part has a little snippet, like an art piece or music piece, some type of art and then it has a little description. And then you, reading that part of the book, you meet that artist that Addie influenced and a little bit of the history behind that art piece, which was such a clever idea. So just to give you an idea of what we're talking about here. So after the first part, I realized what the significance of those little art pieces were for the overall plot. And I thought it was a really clever idea of how she did that. It tied it in to Addie's progression of learning how to influence these people and leaving her mark. And so we learned so much from, studying different art forms, and we can see how important it is to us as a society. I feel like we get to learn different cultures and different societies back in the olden times through what was left behind. And that tended to be, these art things, these art forms. And like Michael mentioned, great quote from the book is, ideas are wilder than memories. And it was just beautifully shown in this book through Addie finding out the cracks in her curse. And it was also just a cool tie-in to have, I pronounce it Bia because her name is Beatrice or Beatriz, and in Portuguese we say Bia is the shortened version. So Bia notices Addie in all of these different art mediums via Addie's stars, as she calls them, aka her 7 freckles across. I pictured it across, like where you normally see freckles is like the bridge of your nose here across your cheekbones. And that's how people remembered her, is that, so like the art pieces that Bia studies, that's the one thing that they all have in common, because obviously Addie can't leave an imprint, but she can leave little snippets of herself. So beautifully done, obviously.
So now to the the grand finale. What did you think of the ending? Was the ending satisfying to you? Were you happy with it? Were you unhappy with it?
Yeah, I thought so. Like, the ending was satisfying to me. At first, I was a little worried we'd only get what happened to Henry as an epilogue after Addie disappears. And I had this, like, sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, because I was like, oh, no, like, that can't be how it ends. Like, I want to just get a little bit of, like, what happened to her. And I would have been a little disappointed with that ending if that's how it ended. But then, like, bam, the ending is that amazing last chapter that we get with Addie. And I freaking loved it. I loved how Addie is finally getting to play the role of Cat in her cat and mouse game with Luke. And that made me super excited. That at this point, like, Addie was finally able to admit that no matter how hard she tries, she would never be a normal human anymore. And she finally accepted that. And I feel like throughout the whole thing, like, she was trying to play normal human. Like, she wanted that normal experience of what it meant to be a human. And she wasn't. Like, yes, Luke was right in a sense, like, she wasn't human. But I feel like he thinks, like, his meaning and her meaning are quite different. So I like to see that contrast between both of them. And I think she also realized that she wasn't powerless anymore when it came to Luke. It was bittersweet to see that she gave Henry a real second chance, not a Luke second chance, but a real second chance that he deserved, while giving up a piece of herself. Literally, she gave herself up, not her soul, herself. And that she'd be so willing to do that. Like, I feel like that just shows how she is still human, you know, like, Luke would never be able to do that, whereas she can, because she understands she's still a human at the core of what that means. So that was cool to see all of that. Let's see here. The chapters leading up to the epilogue were also definitely very gut-wrenching to read, because that is Henry thinking he's living his last, well, I think like 48 hours or something like that. And then you really like feel for him. Like, you can feel that like, did I live, you know, true to myself? Like, did I get to do everything? Did I get to experience everything? Like, how do you say bye to people without telling them bye? So that was really emotional to read. Like I said, though, I did not cry, because I heard a lot of people cried in this book. But, I mean, if an animal doesn't die, I'm not crying. Am I a cold-hearted bitch? Yeah, maybe. But it was still really good. I felt the emotions. I felt that, but, like, no tears fell. So I thought it was a great ending.
So for me, yes and no, but mostly yes. The ending is sad, and then more sad, with a twist of hope in the final words. But I liked it. Addie acknowledging that she's not really a human anymore, acknowledging that she and Henry can only have what would be a blip in her lifetime, is heartbreaking, but also feels like the right thing to do, or the right choice. And as determined as she was to alter hers or Henry's deal with Luke, I figured like that would eventually happen. Cue the more sad thing I mentioned before. But initially believing that she has given herself, not her soul, to Luke for eternity sets up a not so happy ending for Addie, right up until the moment that Barbara keeps referencing in like the literally last paragraph of the book, when Addie reveals that this time it's her game and she is playing Luke using the same tricks that he always has. I really enjoy that little twist there at the end, finding out that Addie, at the very least, is going to attempt to play him. Whether or not he is however many moves ahead, we'll never know, because that's how the book ended, unless she writes another one, I guess. But
I don't think he's ahead of this because she literally like played him at his own game. So I have to disagree with you on that one. I think she does do it. And
but she also thought that finding Henry, she had found like an exception, and you find out later that he set the whole thing up to hurt her. So
right, but that's what I'm saying. Like I feel like that was the last straw. Like that was the last push that she needed to finally realize like how to do this successfully, how to play him successfully. So I think that was the proverbial straw on the camel's back for her. As far as,
I think you're probably
so you said, the meme, like yes, but also no. So what was the no part of that you didn't like? Because you said the yes part, you didn't describe the no part. So I'm curious to know, like, what did you not like?
So the yes, but also no is really only in the sense of like, was the ending satisfying? Because it was a very sad ending up until like the actual end. And so while it was in a grander sense, like a satisfying read, it was not fun to read those chapters because
I see what you're saying. Okay.
Like you mentioned, like when you up until the end, when you think that like you're experiencing like Henry's last, 48 hours,
but you should
last 24 hours. And then, well, unlike you, I don't always try to make those predictions, but it was not a fun section of the book to read. That's what I meant by that.
Okay. Did you like how this story or this book is essentially like written by Henry, quote unquote, like how she turned that into like he wrote her stories down and turned it into a novel? But I thought it was super cute that he didn't put his name on it because it's the first thing that has her name and her name only.
Yep.
And that's what I'm saying. That's love. Like she gave up her literal self for the devil so he could truly live, and he gave up that
his shot of fame. Even though I don't feel like that's what he wanted, really. Like realistically, he didn't. But he did want to be enough, and I feel like maybe if his parents knew or something like that, that would kind of, because his parents seem kind of like assholey in the sense that he has to amount to something. So like he gave up that part of the acknowledgement of knowing people, like of being known, maybe. I mean, that was literally him sacrificing the thing that he claimed that he wanted with his deal, which was
right.
So
yeah,
that was good. I liked that
twist. A little corny, yes, but I thought it was still really cute.
It was a nice twist, especially after like that scene where he has the idea that maybe she can like grab his hand and like do things like that. It was really cool to see like them kind of play with what she can interact with and through other people. So yeah, I really like that as well. Well, we made it to the end. It's time to talk about scores. Barbara, what was your score for this one?
Highest score officially is an 8.5 for me.
And for me, it was tied with the highest score. I gave this a 9. I really liked this book, to be honest, more than I probably thought I was going to coming into it. As much as I liked V.E. Schwab's first book, the description of this one's kind of out of my realm of normal books I'd probably pick up.
Typical fantasy.
It's not, but I really liked it. I'm glad that I read it. So like I said earlier, that made our group score at 8.75 out of 10, which is a pretty dang, I think that might be our highest group score as well. I don't know if we can call it that, though, since it's just the two of us instead of the full trio.
You might have to edit this with your sister's score just to see what she had.
Just to see what we should. But we made it to the end. Thank you guys so much if you're still here for listening. We are Badass Literature Society. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, let us know. Leave us a rating, leave us a comment, leave us a review, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Amazon. Yeah, share it with your friends and family. If you really like it, get it out there. If you've got a book recommendation for us, let us know that too. We always want to add more books to our list, things you guys want to hear more about. So leave us a comment on Instagram or Facebook, or send us a message and let us know what you want us to read. You can give Instagram and Facebook. Make sure you're following us in both places. Our handle there is @BadassLitPod. And with that, we'll see you guys not next month, but we'll see you in September.
We'll see you guys on a bonus episode.
That's true. We'll see you in that bonus episode. That's right. So we'll see you. Yeah. We'll see you kind of in August, and we'll see you again. No book review. Yeah. We'll see you again for that at the end of September. And with that, I'm Michael.
And I'm Barbara.
Bye.